A wizard named Newt sits near a park and thinks about the trip to New York he's about to take. While he's sitting, the lock on his briefcase suddenly opens, but Newt closes it and tells the creature inside to settle down because they'll soon board a ship to New York. After a few hours, Newt arrives in New York and gets in line to have his papers checked by the immigration authorities. When it's his turn, the officer notices that Newt has a British accent, so he asks if it's his first time in New York. Newt tries to avoid eye contact as much as possible, but he tells the officer that it's his first time. Suddenly, his briefcase lock opens again, but he quickly closes it. The officer then asks what's inside his briefcase, but Newt says it's nothing. Despite this, the officer asks to check what's inside, and Newt looks worried. However, he quickly flips something on his briefcase, and as the officer checks it, he only sees Newt's clothes inside. Following this, Newt is allowed to leave, and as he walks on the road, he stops in front of a bank where a lady named Mary is preaching against magic and telling everyone that wizards and witches are real.
Something is stalking our city!
While he tries to move closer to the front so he can hear Mary very well, Newt bumps into a lady named Tina, who happens to be a demoted officer of the Magical Congress of the United States, MACUSA. Newt seems quite interested in what Mary is saying, even though he's just amazed that she knows magic is real. As he's paying close attention to her, a man named Jacob bumps into him on his way to the bank. Jacob says sorry for this, but Newt doesn't think much about it. Almost immediately, Mary calls on Newt and asks if he's also a seeker who wants to know the truth about magic. As Newt tries to give an answer that won't draw much attention to him, he sees that one of the creatures inside his bag, a Niffler, has escaped and is now stealing shiny coins from people. Newt immediately excuses himself and follows the Niffler into the bank, but Tina secretly trails him because she believes he's up to something. After entering the bank, Newt sits next to Jacob and scans the room for the Niffler. Jacob then tries to be friendly, so he asks Newt what he came to do at the bank. Newt says he's there for the same thing as Jacob.
Same as you.
And this leaves him shocked because he actually came to get a loan to open his bakery. Before he says anything else, Newt walks away when he spots the Niffler, and Jacob sees an egg that dropped from his jacket. Jacob tries to call him back to pick up his egg, but as the bank manager's secretary calls him to come and see her boss, he keeps it in his pocket and goes for his loan interview. During the interview, Jacob opens his suitcase and shows the manager the pastries he made. He also talks a lot about his recipe and how much starting a bakery means to him.
You gotta try the Paunchkis.
Unfortunately, this doesn't get him the loan, and he's dismissed from the manager's office. As he heads out, he notices that the egg in his pocket is about to hatch. Coincidentally, he sees Newt moving around and trying to catch the Niffler, so he calls him to come and take his egg. Newt is so close to getting the Niffler, but he then draws out his wand and uses it to get closer to Jacob, who looks shocked. After collecting the egg, Newt watches it hatch before keeping it. Jacob doesn't understand what just happened, but he decides to follow Newt, even though he's still trying to catch the Niffler. As the creature enters the vault, Newt tries to open it with his wand, but the bank manager suddenly shows up. He sees Jacob with Newt and says he can't believe that the baker is trying to rob the bank to get money to build his bakery. Jacob tries to explain that he doesn't understand what's happening, but Newt freezes the man with his wand. He then breaks into the vault and grabs the Niffler, after which he keeps the creature back inside his suitcase. Unfortunately, some cops arrive at the vault to catch Newt and Jacob, but the wizard uses his wand to teleport them out of the building. Jacob feels overwhelmed by what's happening, so Newt drops his suitcase and calms him down before saying he'll have to obliviate the baker to ensure he doesn't remember everything that happened. As Newt tries to take his wand from his pocket, Jacob picks up his suitcase and runs away because he's scared of what might happen to him. Newt is disappointed by this, but as he's about to leave, Tina catches him. She then asks who he is and what's inside his suitcase. Newt tells her his name and says that he only has his Niffler inside the suitcase. Tina says he's not supposed to leave his pets to roam around the city, and Newt apologizes for this. She then asks if he wiped Jacob's memory, but as he says he didn't, Tina shows Newt that she's an officer of MACUSA,
I'm taking you in.
who will be taking him in for violating the rules for wizards in New York. Elsewhere, the director of magical security in New York, Graves, arrives at a scene where witnesses claim that a dark wind destroyed a building. As he looks around and examines the building, the wall suddenly cracks and an invisible force suddenly breaks free and leaves the scene by moving under the road and destroying it. Everyone is shocked by this, but as Graves looks closer, he starts to wonder if there's a dangerous creature on the loose. After a while, he reports what happened to an investigative team. As the president of the agency, Pickery mentions that they need to find the creature before the non-magical people in the city start to get curious about what's happening. Tina enters the room with Newt to report that he has a strange creature inside his suitcase. Pickery doesn't seem to care, and she tells Tina to maintain her place as a demoted officer. She also mentions that the investigative team is now more interested in major issues. Tina looks disappointed by this, and even though she tries to make a case for her point to be heard,
Madam President, but
she's sent away to take care of Newt's violation on her own. As they get to her desk, Tina checks Newt's records and sees that he recently went on a trip to Equatorial Guinea. Newt says he went there to rescue some magical creatures, which he plans to talk about in a book he's writing. He adds that people need to understand the creatures and learn to treat them well instead of always looking forward to destroying them. Before Tina can say anything, Graves shows up at her desk and asks for more information regarding Newt's case. After she says that he has a strange creature in his suitcase, Graves tells her to open it. Tina immediately does this, but she sees that the case is filled with pastries. Tina looks shocked by this, and Newt realizes that Jacob has his suitcase. Elsewhere, Jacob arrives home and drops the suitcase on his bed. Suddenly, he starts hearing a strange sound coming from the suitcase, and as he opens it, he unknowingly sets free some of the creatures that Newt has been keeping. Unfortunately, they also destroy his building and attack him. Meanwhile, Tina looks disappointed to have shown a box of pastries to Graves. She also asks why Newt didn't just obliviate Jacob.
I can't believe you didn't obliviate that man.
Newt says he was going to do it, but Tina still looks worried because she could take the fall for the violation if Jacob or the suitcase is not found. As they're walking on the streets, Newt suddenly sees a moth flying in the area. It turns out that it was one of the creatures in his bag, but as he hears people shouting nearby, he walks toward them and sees a damaged building. While some residents are telling the police that the building damage was caused by a gas explosion, a man suddenly mentions that he saw something strange coming out of the building. Before he exposes the magical community by talking about the creatures he saw, he suddenly sniffs something that makes him forget what he's about to say. Meanwhile, Newt goes into Jacob's apartment and restores the damage. He then checks his suitcase and sees that some creatures are missing. As Tina joins him there, she sees Jacob on the floor and notices that he has been bitten by one of Newt's creatures. Newt eventually finds the creature in the room and hides it inside his suitcase. Tina looks shocked and wonders if Newt has many animals in the box. She also tells Newt to help Jacob, but he says the baker will be all right because the bites aren't lethal.
Looks ill.
He'll be fine. That bites aren't serious.
He then decides to obliviate Jacob, but Tina tells him not to do it because she needs him as a witness. She also says that both of them will come with her to her house. Newt doesn't get why he still needs to follow her since she now has her witness, but she urges him to help her carry Jacob to her house. Elsewhere, a man named Langdon brings Mary and her adopted kids, Credence, Chastity, and Modesty, to see his father, Shaw Sr., who owns the biggest newspaper in the city. While Shaw Sr. is in a meeting with his other son, Senator Shaw, Langdon brings the guests into the office and tells his dad that Mary has a big story to share. He adds that she believes the strange things happening in the city are a result of witchcraft. Shaw Sr. doesn't sound interested in this story, and Senator Shaw also tells Langdon to take Mary and her freaks out of the office. Langdon doesn't like this, but Mary doesn't mind leaving. Before she does so, she tells Shaw Sr. that she hopes he'll be willing to reconsider his stance in the future.
We hope you'll reconsider, Mr. Shaw.
As she heads out with her kids, Credence drops a flyer of Mary's group on the floor, but Senator Shaw calls him to pick it up. He then calls Credence a freak again and tells him that he belongs in the trash. Credence looks sad to hear this, but he walks away without saying anything. Shortly after, he meets Graves at a secret corner of the city. Graves then asks if Credence has already found what he wants, but he says he hasn't. Graves notices that Credence is looking sad, so he asks if his abusive mom has beaten him again. Credence says says it's not his mom, and he asks Graves if he thinks he's a freak. Graves says he's not, and that if he thought so, he wouldn't have given Credence a special task. Credence then mentions that he needs to know if Graves is looking for a boy or a girl. Graves says he doesn't know the gender of the child he's looking for, but that his vision showed him that Credence is the key to finding the person. Graves then promises to help Credence join the wizarding community if he completes the task. Much later, Tina arrives home with Newt and Jacob. She then introduces them to her sister, Queenie, who instantly gets attracted to Jacob, even though the MACUSA law prevents witches from having relationships with non-magical people. Queenie looks happy to have guests around, and she prepares a meal for them.
Get the money he wanted for his bakery. You bake, honey?
As they sit to eat, Newt still stands near the entrance because he wants to leave to find his other missing creatures, but Tina convinces him to join them for dinner. After a while, Newt eventually suggests leaving with Jacob so that they can find a place to sleep for the night, but Tina says there's an empty room for them in her apartment. Despite not looking interested in this, Newt agrees to stay in the room with Jacob. When they're left alone, he then puts down his suitcase and surprisingly walks into it. Jacob is extremely shocked by this, but Newt calls him to also come in. As he joins Newt, Jacob finds himself in a room where the wizard takes an antidote and helps him clean the bite marks on his neck. While Newt is then pouring a shiny blue liquid into another bottle, Jacob asks what it is. Newt says that the serum is gotten from a creature whose venom is useful for removing bad memories. Jacob still looks confused, so Newt takes him to a place where he sees the creature, which he calls Frank. Jacob looks shocked to see Frank, and he also realizes that Newt's suitcase is like a safe haven for magical creatures. Newt then mentions that he saved Frank in Egypt while he was being trafficked. He adds that Frank is the reason he came to America because his natural habitat is in Arizona. Jacob asks what Newt does with the creatures, and he says he rescues and nurtures them.
Rescue, nurture, and protect them.
He adds that he's also trying to get his fellow wizards to be kind to magical creatures. Following this, Jacob meets some other creatures, including a grasshopper named Picket, who keeps clinging to Newt. While moving around, he also sees a dark parasite inside a special room, but before he touches it, Newt stops him. As he asks what it is, Newt says it's an Obscurus. Before Jacob asks more questions, Newt says he needs to find the missing creatures before they get hurt. He then asks Jacob where he can find a creature that likes trees and an open plain, and he says it's definitely in Central Park. Newt says they must head there immediately, but Jacob doesn't think they should leave the ladies without telling them anything. Newt then tells Jacob that he has to understand that if the ladies find out that he's already feeling better, they'll obliviate him because it's part of the rules they follow. Since he still wants to retain his memory, Jacob decides to follow Newt, and they head out together. Meanwhile, Credence arrives home late from his secret meeting with Graves. Mary doesn't like this.
Where have you been?
And as Credence lies about where he went, she tells him to wait for her in his room so she can flog him there. Elsewhere, Newt and Jacob walk around the city and head for the park. On the way, Newt sees the Niffler inside a jewelry store and immediately goes after the creature. Unfortunately, the creature gives him a hard time, but Newt captures it just as the cops arrive. Before they can escape, the cops accuse them of breaking into the jewelry shop to rob the place, and they're unable to defend themselves. Luckily, a lion suddenly walks nearby, and as the cops look surprised, Newt teleports himself and Jacob away from the scene. Meanwhile, Tina and Queenie figure out that the men are gone, and they start wondering where they went. At the park, Newt and Jacob find the last creature, which turns out to be a huge rhino. As Newt is about to tame it, the rhino suddenly targets Jacob. Before he gets killed, though, Newt saves his new friend and traps the rhino inside his suitcase. Jacob thanks Newt for helping him, and the wizard says they just need to find the last creature that escaped from his suitcase.
2 down, 1 to go.
As they eventually enter the case to check that all the animals are okay, Tina shows up at the park and locks them inside before carrying the suitcase away. Elsewhere, at a town hall meeting where Senator Shaw is talking about his campaign plans, an invisible force slowly puts off the lights in the city. Tina sees this, and she wonders what's going on. The invisible force then interrupts the town hall meeting and kills Senator Shaw before tearing one of his posters. After the strange creature leaves, Graves. Everyone at the meeting looks shocked, but Langdon suddenly realizes that it might have something to do with the magical community that Mary talked about. Meanwhile, Tina heads to McCusa's headquarters and interrupts a council meeting to report that she knows someone who brought strange creatures to the city. Pickery scolds her for only just bringing such information to the council after someone has died. As Tina wonders who died, Pickery tells her to reveal the proof she has.
Where is this man?
Tina then drops the suitcase and taps on it for the men to come out. Suddenly, Newt and Jacob come outside and find themselves in the middle of a council meeting. Someone recognizes Newt as a wizard from London, but as Pickery asks who Jacob is, Tina says he's one of the non-magicals in the city. Everyone in the room is shocked, but as Pickery blames Newt for letting his creatures kill Senator Shaw, he denies it. As he then looks at the dead body, he says that none of his creatures could have done it. He also mentions that the mark on the dead body indicates that Senator Shaw was killed by an Obscurus. Everyone is shocked to hear this, but Pickery says he's lying because there hasn't been an Obscurus in America for many years. She also accuses Newt of trying to lie to protect his creatures, so she tells Graves to seize the suitcase and arrest the wizard from London, as well as Jacob and Tina. Newt begs them not to hurt his creatures, but Pickery says she'll decide what to do with them.
Take them to the cells.
Following this, they're taken to a cell, and there, Tina says sorry to Newt for bringing his pets to the council meeting. Jacob then asks what an Obscurus is, and Tina says it's a dark force that attacks people and disappears. She adds that there hasn't been one in a long time, but Newt says he saw one in Sudan about 3 months ago. Tina is shocked to hear this, and Newt mentions that the Obscurus in Sudan took control of a young girl. He says it's how they usually claim their host, and that no Obscurus has been known to live past the age of 10. Shortly after, Graves calls Newt and Tina to the interrogation room to answer some questions. There, Newt insists that he had nothing to do with Senator Shaw's death, but Graves then shows him the Obscurus that was found in his suitcase. Newt immediately defends himself and tells Tina that he separated the Obscurus from the Sudanese girl when he tried to save her. He also mentions that the Obscurus is useless without a host.
He could not hurt anyone, Tina.
But Graves still thinks he's not telling the truth. He then sentences Newt to death and says that Tina will also be killed for helping the wizard. Newt mentions that Tina didn't do anything wrong, but Graves doesn't listen to him. As they're both about to be executed by some agents, Queenie senses it and heads straight to McCusa. When she enters, she sees Jacob being taken to have his memory wiped, so she requests to be put in charge of him. After her request is granted, she tells Jacob that she can feel it when Tina is in trouble and that she needs to save her sister. She then asks for Newt's suitcase, and Jacob tells her that it's with Graves. Following this, they sneak into Graves' office to steal the suitcase while he's not there. Meanwhile, Pickett helps Newt defeat the agents in the execution room. Newt then saves Tina from falling into a pool of a chemical meant to melt her body. After they escape the room, Queenie and Jacob eventually bump into them. Queenie then tells them to enter the suitcase so she can leave the building with them.
Get in.
Elsewhere, Credence starts to take his task seriously, and he suspects that Modesty might be the girl Graves is looking for. After all, Mary's adopted kids are given flyers to distribute to people in the city. Modesty heads outside and throws them around her assigned spot. Much later, Graves goes to see Credence again to ask for a progress report. He notices that Credence has been beaten again by his mom, so he heals him and says they'll make Mary pay for her sins when the task is complete. He then gives Credence a necklace and tells him to tap on the pendant if he has any new information. He adds that the child he's looking for is sick and he needs to help him or her as soon as possible. Elsewhere, Newt and Tina make it out of McCusa with Queenie's help. Tina then says that they need to find Newt's missing creatures so that Graves won't blame them for Senator Shaw's death. Newt says there's only one creature left to find.
There's only one still missing.
But that it turns invisible sometimes. As they wonder where they can find it, Tina suggests going to see her old informant, Narlac, who trades creatures. After they reach Narlac's bar, Newt asks Tina why she got demoted, and she says it's because she attacked Mary for always beating Credence. She adds that she has also been warned to stay away from Mary and her children. Shortly after, Narlac shows up and refuses to tell them anything unless he gets Pickett in return. Newt doesn't want want to let go of Pickett, but as Narlac insists, he's left with no choice. Narlac then collects Pickett and tells Newt where to find the invisible creature. Before he and the others can leave, though, it turns out that Narlac has already called the officers at Makusa to come over and arrest the fugitives. Newt and Tina are shocked by this, but as they beat up Narlac and get back Pickett, they leave with Queenie and Jacob. Elsewhere, Credence finds a magic wand under Modesty's bed, and as he asks what she's using it for,
Where'd you get this?
Mary sees it with him and thinks it's for him. Before she beats him, Modesty defends Credence and says that the wand is hers, but Mary doesn't believe her. Suddenly, the belt magically drops from her hand, and as she tries to pick it up, it moves away from her. As Mary looks shocked, the Obscurus appears in the room and kills her before leaving the building. Shortly after, Graves arrives at the house and sees the damage that has been done. He sees that Mary is also dead, and he asks Credence where his sister is. Credence tells Graves to help him, but he seems more concerned about finding Modesty. As Credence eventually takes him to where Modesty usually spends her free time, Graves starts looking around for her. He then tells Credence that he's no longer of use to him.
I'm done with you.
He also mentions that even though Credence has magical ancestry, he has no powers and is useless. He adds that Credence's reward for helping him is Mary's death, and that since he has gotten that, there's nothing else for him. Credence is disappointed by this, and he looks betrayed. Shortly after, Graves finds Modesty and tells her not to be scared because he's there with her brother. Modesty looks terrified, but before Graves says anything else, some parts of the building start to crack. Credence then breaks 2 walls and reveals to Graves that he's the Obscurus. Graves is shocked by this, and he quickly tries to make Credence believe he didn't mean the things he said earlier. However, Credence says he doesn't trust Graves anymore, and that he feels betrayed because he really thought they were friends.
That you were my friend.
Before Graves says anything, Credence flies out of the building as the Obscurus, and Newt sees it from the roof of a building he's standing on with Tina, Queenie, and Jacob. He then mentions that it's the most powerful Obscurus he has ever seen. However, he believes he can save the host, so he gives his suitcase to Tina and tells her to take care of his creatures in case he doesn't return. As he leaves, Tina looks shocked and drops the case with Queenie to follow him. Credence keeps destroying things in the area, and Graves tells him to calm down. He also calls Credence a miracle and tells him that there's so much they can achieve together. Newt hears this and tells Tina that the host is Credence. Tina is surprised because Credence is not a child, but Newt says he probably survived because his powers grew stronger. Tina then tells Newt to save Credence while she distracts Graves. Credence eventually continues moving around, and Tina stops Graves from following him. After a while, he gets past her and tries to find Credence again. Elsewhere, some cops start shooting at Credence, but he kills them all and wreaks havoc in the area before running into a tunnel. Graves sees this and immediately gets his officers to create a barrier to seal the area. Newt enters before the barrier is completely down, and he runs into the tunnel to find Credence. When Newt finds him, he says he met someone like Credence in Sudan and that he was able to save the person. He says he can save Credence too, but before he gets closer, Graves attacks Newt. Luckily, Newt avoids getting killed, but Credence flies out and heads to the sky before breaking the roof of the tunnel. Everyone outside sees this, and Shaw Sr. says he wants Credence killed for killing his son. Pickery and her agents are already at the scene, and they look disappointed that many of the non-magicals have seen proof of magic in the city.
Look, take photos.
Back in the tunnel, Credence nearly attacks Graves and Newt, but Tina shows up and tells him to stop. She says that she and Newt can help him, but Graves tells Credence not to listen to her. Credence appears to be calmer around Tina, but as he accepts her offer, Pickery and her agents enter the tunnel to kill the Obscurus. Graves tells them not to do that, but Pickery still orders her agents to kill Credence. After Credence vanishes, Graves tells Pickery that she has made a big mistake, but she says she had to follow their laws and kill him for murdering a non-magical person. Graves says their laws are wrong and that they shouldn't be doing things like that. As he walks away, Pickery tells her agents not to let him leave, and he turns back to attack her. Her agents protect her, but before he breaks their barrier, Newt and Tina team up to tie his hands and get him arrested. Newt then uses his wand to reveal Graves' true face, and it turns out that a wanted dark wizard named Grindelwald actually turned himself into Graves so that he could acquire the Obscurus. As Pickery then walks up to Grindelwald, he asks if she really thinks she can hold him for long, and she says she'll do her best.
We'll do our best, Mr. Grindelwald.
After he's taken away, Queenie and Jacob arrive at the scene to meet Tina and Newt. Pickery then talks about how the magical world is already exposed because there's no way to obliviate everyone in the city. However, Newt says it's possible, and he releases Frank to use his venom to obliviate everyone. Suddenly, Frank flies outside to the sky, and as rain starts falling, all the non-magical people in the city start forgetting everything they saw. The magical community then repairs all the damage to make the city look clean again. Pickery thanks Newt for this, but she says he needs to get his suitcase out of New York. Newt says he'll do that, but as Pickery and her agents are about to leave, she remembers that they've still not obliviated Jacob. Newt and the others try to plead for him, but Pickery says there can be no exceptions. Following this, Jacob looks sad and says goodbye to Newt, Tina, and Queenie.
It's okay, it's okay.
As he enters the rain, he forgets everything that happened, and Newt also disappears along with Tina and Queenie. The next day, Newt bumps into Jacob on the road and switches their suitcases. Jacob doesn't know who bumped into him, but as he notices that his suitcase is now heavy, he opens it and sees that there are some silver shells inside. He also finds a letter from a good Samaritan who tells him to use the shells as collateral for the loan he wants to take to start his bakery. Jacob looks happy about this, and he immediately heads to the bank. Shortly after, Tina thanks Newt for helping her get her job back. He says he only did the right thing, and as he's about to board a ship back to London, he tells Tina that he'll bring her a copy of his book when he's through with it. Much later, Jacob has already opened a bakery, and he gets many customers daily. One day, while he's at the shop, Queenie comes over to buy some pastries. Jacob eventually catches her staring at him, and even though he can't remember who she is, he gets attracted to her again.